So Beringia is a very important topic in thinking about the Pleistocene paleontology of the whole northern hemisphere, because it's the only connection between Asia and North America that was ever present for the last several million years. Even going back before the Pleistocene, there's much evidence for the movement of dinosaurs during the Cretaceous between Asia and North America through some sort of a bering land bridge that is very difficult to reconstruct geologically. But we know that over the last, say, 4 million years, that Beringia was really controlled by the rising and the lowering of sea levels because of the development of glaciers on land. So many of these animals moved across what we call the Mammoth steppe. Is that right? Mammoth steppe? Okay, the Mammoth steppe, as we call it. But the Mammoth steppe was this massive region across the northern hemisphere with many of these species that we share in common. It's an important region for archaeologists because this is the region that the first people from Asia crossed into North America. Approximately 15,000 years ago. But this is a very controversial topic. And of course, the people that are living in the region that I live in, the native people, they were direct descendants of those people when I crossed the land bridge 15,000 years ago. So there's several questions that really guide our research in Beringia and specifically in Yukon. We're really trying to establish what species were present in the past, but more importantly, when they were present in the past. So very important to do lots of different types of dating. That's a very important part of our project. How did these plants and animals respond to climate change in the past? So with warming and cooling intervals, how did these plants and animals respond to that? Did they respond as individuals or did they respond as huge communities? These are some of the questions we worked on. Importantly, what were the mechanisms, what were the factors that drove the extinctions that happened in Beringia, but also the whole of North America at the end of the Ice Age? So this is a very controversial topic as well. The discussion between human hunting overkill versus environmental or climate change driving extinctions. It's still a very active debate. And what does looking at the fossils, what does the ancient record of life tell us and inform us about how we are experiencing change at present? Where I live, we know that the climate is warming very quickly. The winters are much warmer now than they were 10 years ago, 100 years ago, even 200 years ago. So we see the changes that are happening in the plants and animal communities. What can the past tell us about the present? So this is a map of Yukon Territory. You can see it's far northwest of Canada. I live in the city of Whitehorse, and my work is mostly in the region called the Klondike. It's about a 6-hour drive north of Whitehorse, about 600 kilometers. And between Whitehorse and the Klondike, there's 2 small villages totaling about 200 people. So I can drive for 6 hours and not see anybody and very little evidence of civilization, which is wonderful. This is what the environment looks like around the region today. It's mostly coniferous forest with spruce, picea, birch, betula, and trees like that. It's all underlaid by the permafrost, so this is frozen ground. And in the valley bottoms, these rolling hills are where the gold diggers look for gold in the ground. And really between 1848 and 1896 is when the Klondike gold rush happened. And that's really became the establishment of white people, European people, or non-native people in this part of the world. Going from first California, San Francisco, California, the gold rush, they would take a boat all the way up to Alaska, get off the boat, and then climb the mountains with everything they own. They had to get to the top of the mountain, and then they go down on the rivers. They built boats out of small trees, and then went down the river all the way to Dawson City to the Klondike. It was a major event, a major transformative event in North America in terms of movement of people, but also the economy. It was huge. This is what Dawson City looked like when the first gold miners arrived. There was one family that lived on the corner of the river, and they would camp there, they would go fishing there, then they would pick up their things and go hunting. So this was all the people that lived in the region in 1897. Then 1898, when all the people arrived, it was totally changed their life. It went from virtually the Stone Age to the Industrial Age, overnight. So this is what he built. He started his empire in Dawson City during the Klondike. So we owe all our problems in the world today to the Yukon, so I'm sorry. So these men, of course, came for gold to get rich. But I think they ultimately stayed because of the Pleistocene fossils. So there's many stories and accounts. This is a photograph from 1904 of these men with this beautiful skull and tusks of a woolly mammoth. Of course, it must have been very, very odd for them because they were not educated. They had never seen fossils before. They were coming to look for gold, not for something like this. So the stories they must have told themselves about elephants in the Arctic must have been crazy. They probably weren't aware of what had been found in Siberia and places like that before. So this was very new to them and very exciting. These fossils are found in great abundance, and this is an example of a store in the year 1900, where a gold miner must have been selling these fossils. Institutions from all across the world, such as Paris, New York, Washington, they all wanted to come take fossils from the Yukon, from the Klondike, and bring it back to their collections. So these fossils are full of Yukon material that has never really been studied, I don't think, and needs to be examined further. But it was the journey. You can see, you can trace the route from Paris to New York, a train, a boat, over a mountain. They put so much effort into retrieving these fossils from their institutions. In this image we see frozen mud, frozen muck we call it, with big ice wedges from the Pleistocene. That's probably 30 meters high. And that has to be removed in order to get the gold. So for us, this is very exciting because it provides a stratigraphic profile of the Pleistocene. And this is what we are interested in. We want to be able to look at those sediments to study the Ice Age climates. So they use a variety of types of techniques, these caterpillars, bulldozers, but the most useful for us are these large hoses of high pressure water that are used to melt the ground. So I'm going to show you what that looks like here. So this is Dick pretending to be a gold miner, Dick Mole. We have Rob Lockenfeld over here, our other friend, and we walk along these small rivers and collect the bones as we are melting the permafrost. So this is very hard work, and because in the summer, the sun is always in the air and never gets dark. They generally will do this for 24 hours a day. 2 shifts, 1 person for 12, 1 person for 12. And then when the paleontologists come like us, we get to have fun to do it too. I would not want to do this every day for 4 months a year. It would be very difficult, but they do. You can see that Dick is a very hard-working man. He likes his job very much. And we think when he gets retired from working in the Netherlands, we will bring him to the Yukon and be a gold miner for a long time. This shows the same thing at a different angle, and I think you'll get a perspective at this valley with all this gravel, and then above it, several 30 meters of black frozen mud that needs to be removed in order for the gold miners to continue working. But if you're a quaternary geologist, stratigraphy, this is amazing because you have this exposed window into the ice age. Okay. So all that frozen black mud that I showed is loess. It's this dust that was blowing around during the Pleistocene when it was cold and dry, and then deposited incrementally in the valleys. And this is a modern loess system in southern Yukon, where we have glaciers blowing wind off the glaciers, picking up the dirt, and then deposited on the landscape. And within that loess sediment that we find, we also find the remains of ancient volcanoes, distal tephras from volcanoes in Alaska, the Aleutian Islands here, and some other volcanic centers along the Alaska-Yukon border. So these volcanoes were erupting many, many times during the Pleistocene. We have well over 100 tephras that we find in the loess that provide very good stratigraphic information. And for example, this tephra here, this is called the Dawson tephra, here is almost 1 meter thick. And it's coming from a volcano in the Aleutian Islands that's 1,500 kilometers away. So these are massive eruptions that have very global significance for climate. In North America, we have many different types of bison. We have something called bison latifrons, bison priscus, and this is the living bison today that's living in North America. Bison are important because they were one animal that moved to North America very late. And before that, North America was dominated by mammoths and horses. When bison enter a landscape, they become very dominant very quickly. So when did this happen? So this is a river in the north of Yukon that we worked on called the Porcupine. And in 2006, we're working on a bed that dates to the Eemian glaciation, interglaciation, about 140,000 years ago. We see in the sediments there's sticks and evidence of trees, so we know this is interglaciation. And we have a volcanic tephra here that's about 150,000 years old. We found the metacarpal bone of a bison. So we were able to do some very direct dating. We knew that it had to be older than 150,000 years old. And we now believe that the earliest bison entered North America about 160,000 years ago. So horses are also a very important part of our faunas. Probably the most important horse fossil we have is this small metacarpal bone that was found beneath a volcanic ash, a tephra, that's about 700,000 years old. And we were able to, with my colleagues at the University of Copenhagen, able to extract a complete mitochondrial DNA from this, a complete genome from this horse. It's the oldest DNA in the world because the permafrost is so good for preservation of this DNA and other remains that it's very important and provides very important new information. We've now been doing much work with horse morphology and looking at the size and trying to use size as an important way to distinguish populations or species of horses. One are these very large Cavalline horses, which are essentially much like domestic horses in Europe today. We have smaller Cavalline horses, so smaller bodied Equus caballus. But then we were very surprised, based on morphology and DNA, that we found what we're calling a new genus of horses that was never defined before, that we call Harrington hippus. And these are these stilt-legged horses that have very thin gracile metapodials and foot bones. And they were thought to be related to the Eurasian or European ass, but we know genetically they're not even a horse at all. So based on nuclear and mitochondrial genomes, we showed that this group of horses diverged from crowned Equus during the Miocene, 7 million years ago, and never interbred with other horse groups. Is this gap true? Or is it really just an artifact of not finding the right site or the right specimens? But so far with 80 radiocarbon dates, this gap seems to be real. So maybe lions, it was so cold and so dry for them, they had a very difficult time and there was not many around. The other large cap that we're studying as well for radiocarbon, because we have very, very few of them in North America. For example, this specimen here, yielded a full mitochondrial genome as well. And what we learned is that it's exactly the same species as the one in Eurasia, in Europe. Before they were classified as two different species, we know now based on DNA they're the same species. And we've learned that they all are gone by about 40,000, 45,000 years ago. The other large predator, or large carnivore, Arctodocimus, another species you don't have in Asia or Europe. This is a giant bear, massive bear, probably 1,000 kilograms. And we compared in body size, so we have Arctodus here. We have what we call the Kodiak grizzly. This is a regular brown bear from the continent. That's not so big, but very big. I don't like to see it in the woods when I go walking my dog. So this is our small collection. You know, in 100 years of collecting, this is all the Arctodus material that we've been able to find. We're also become quite interested in the interglaciation. So this is a typical reconstruction of what we think the environment and the mammal community looked like during the interglaciations in the high north, the far north. So Jefferson ground sloth, we have American mastodon, Mammoeta americana, some camels, So a very different community than the mammoth steppe community of the glacial. Well, this is probably my favorite animal that you don't have here. You have what you call the giant beaver, but that's not a giant beaver. This is a giant beaver. We think it ate exclusively people. It was a carnivore. No, actually not at all. So we find typically the remains like this. This is the mandible of living Castor canadensis, and this is Castroides ohioensis. So we've done much radiocarbon dating on all these species just to confirm where they fit within our chronology. And we realize that they all date to beyond 50,000 years ago, so we assume that they were part of the interglacial fauna. So these are all browsers. These were not animals that ate grass. They only lived during forested times. So it gives us a very interesting perspective about Beringia and the Bering Land Bridge and how it affected the movement of animals. Because we always assume that this Beringia, this mammoth steppe, always connected animals back and forth. But during the interglaciations, when it was warm and we had increases in sea level, it was a barrier for the movement of North American animals into Asia. They just were not able to penetrate across the Bering Land Bridge because it did not exist because of the high sea levels. And this is providing some very interesting analog information for what's happening today with many large mammals moving northward. Because all these animals here, the deer, the mule deer, white-tailed deer, mule deer, skunk, brown bears, cougars, pumas, coyotes, Canis latrans, they're all animals that in the last 50 years have expanded their ranges much, much further north. And what's very troubling, like for brown bears, is that they're moving north to the Arctic coast and interbreeding with polar bears now. This puma is a fantastic animal. It lives all the way south of Patagonia in Argentina. And it only entered Yukon and Alaska 40 years ago. So it's only moving northward in recent times. And people attribute this to global warming winters especially. So the interglaciations provide an important comparison to what we see happening today, and important relevance to understand modern ecosystems. So I'm just going to finish my presentation here with a couple what we thought were our most exciting discoveries of the last couple summers out in the field. I'm not sure. Florian, when was this photo could have been taken at 3 o'clock in the morning, because it's light all the time, so you kind of act start to get crazy. You're always awake, and you just want to, a guy like Vic Moll, he's so obsessed with mammoths. He just doesn't want to go to sleep in the Arctic. He just wants to go mammoths, go work. But of course, that will make you crazy too, and I don't want to end up like him. So crazy. What I think is my favorite discovery that was made by the gold miners in the last 2 years was in 2016. So this gold miner that we know very well, that has much experience with these Ice Age fossils, called us, and he was so excited because he was using the big hose, and this fell out of the frozen mud. And this is what we call popsicle. And this is a 15,000-year-old puppy baby wolf from the Ice Age. We took it to a veterinarian, and they estimated it was it's a female, and she died before the 8 weeks of age. We have not done any studies on it yet, except for the radiocarbon dating. And the other, only 10 days later, a carcass, only cut, but it was accidentally cut in half by the caterpillar of a caribou. And the caribou gave us a radiocarbon date of greater than 50,000 years old. But exciting, we went to the site the next day, and he showed us exactly where it was found. And we saw this tephra, this volcanic ash, in the section above it, and the tephra is 80,000 years old. So we know that it's older than 80,000 years old. So very exciting. I think it's probably the oldest confirmed mummified material from the region, maybe from the whole northern hemisphere. Gold miners who are very interested in the fossils. They have 4 months to gold mine 24 hours a day so they can make enough money to feed their families. But when they find these spectacular fossils, they always confident that we have a very good working relationship, very similar to how I've seen in the last several days how the people here work so closely with the fishermen on the North Sea, collecting fossils and working together, because everybody is interested and everybody wants to learn from it. Scientists and amateur paleontologists and people that are working in industry, you know, the people of the Netherlands, the people of Belgium, can really help work with Canadians too to show the world that these things work best when you cooperate and collaborate and you don't behave like, you know, Mr. Fake News of the South. So I think I will leave my presentation here, and thank you very much for your time and for your interest and for listening to me.